Welcome to Curio Hour. What follows is a long one: heists, mysteries, and moments history nearly forgot, gathered into one continuous listen. Get comfortable and let these stories carry you towards sleep. On a quiet night in 1971, a man in London tuned his radio and heard something strange. Voices plotting a robbery in real time. Beneath a busy street, a gang was tunneling into a bank vault, talking to a lookout on walkie-talkies. And a stranger was listening to every word. He called the police, and yet somehow the robbers still got away. This is the strange story of the Baker Street robbery. Our story takes place in London in September of 1971 on the famous Baker Street, a name known around the world. On the corner of Baker Street stood a branch of Lloyd's Bank. Like many banks of the time, it offered its customers safe deposit boxes. These were small, secure boxes kept in a strong room deep within the bank, where people stored their most precious valuables: jewelry, cash, documents, and secrets. The safe deposit vault was considered extremely secure. It was an underground strongroom, protected by thick walls and a heavy door beneath the busy streets of central London. But the gang that targeted it had identified a clever way in. They would not go through the bank at all. They would come up through the floor. A few doors down from the bank on the same street was a leather goods shop that happened to be empty and available to rent. The gang rented the shop, using it as their secret base. From there, they would tunnel underground, beneath the buildings in between, and up into the bank's vault. The plan was the work of a well-organized crew, with the skills and patience for serious digging. The tunnel would have to travel about 40 feet beneath two other buildings. It was painstaking work. They had to break through thick walls and dig through earth and concrete, all while keeping the noise down to avoid being heard. They used a thermal lance, a tool that burns through metal and masonry with intense heat, to help cut their way through the obstacles in their path. To coordinate the operation, the gang used radios. A lookout was posted on the rooftop of a nearby building, watching the street and the area around the bank. The lookout kept in contact with the diggers below using walkie-talkies, warning them of any danger and helping coordinate the breakthrough into the vault. It was a sensible precaution, but it would prove to be the gang's great undoing in the most unexpected way imaginable. Because radio waves do not stay neatly between two walkie-talkies. They spread out into the air, and anyone tuned to the right frequency might pick them up. The gang had no way of knowing who, across the sprawling city, might happen to be listening on that exact channel at that exact hour. As it turned out, someone was. Over the weekend, the gang worked through their tunnel, inching ever closer to the strongroom. On the night of the break-in, they finally reached the vault floor. They burst up into the safe deposit room, surrounded by hundreds of locked boxes, each one a small treasure chest waiting to be opened. The gang set to work, prying open box after box and emptying their contents. Cash, jewelry, gold, and valuables of every kind were stuffed into bags. It was a fortune. The exact total has always been disputed, but it ran into the millions, an enormous sum for the time. Possibly the largest such robbery in Britain to that point. As they worked, the lookout on the roof kept watch, chatting with the diggers over the walkie-talkies, reporting that the coast was clear. The robbery seemed to be going perfectly. The gang was deep inside the vault, the street was quiet, and a fortune was filling their bags. But not far away in his home, an amateur radio enthusiast was about to stumble into the middle of the whole affair. His name was Robert Rowlands, and he was a radio ham, a hobbyist who loved tuning across the airwaves, listening for distant and unusual signals. That night, as he scanned the frequencies, he picked up something that did not sound like ordinary chatter. He heard voices talking about a robbery as it happened. He heard the lookout and the diggers talking. References to breaking through, to money, to the danger of being caught. It slowly dawned on him that he was overhearing a crime in progress. At one point, he reportedly heard the lookout warn the others and discuss how they would carry on the next night if needed. This was no joke. It was real. Rollins did the responsible thing. He contacted the police to report what he was hearing. But here is where the story becomes frustrating and strange. The police took his report seriously, but they had a major problem. They knew a robbery was happening somewhere nearby, but they did not know exactly where. The radio signals told them a bank was being robbed, but not which bank. And in central London, there were a great many banks within range of those walkie-talkies. The police reportedly began checking banks in the area, trying to find the one being broken into. But it was like searching for a needle in a haystack in the dark. Officers even visited the very bank that was being robbed, but from the outside, everything looked secure and normal. The robbery was happening underground, out of sight. The search dragged on through the night. And while the police hunted for the right building, the gang in the vault kept working and then made their escape. By the time the bank was opened and the robbery discovered, the thieves were long gone, having vanished back through their tunnel with their enormous haul. When the safe deposit vault was finally examined, the scene was astonishing. The floor had been breached and hundreds of boxes lay broken open and empty. Despite the radio ham's warning, despite the police search, the gang had pulled it off and escaped clean. It was a deeply embarrassing outcome for the authorities. A massive investigation followed, and eventually, through painstaking police work, several members of the gang were tracked down and arrested. Some of those involved were caught and brought to trial, convicted, and sentenced to prison for their part in the robbery. But much of the loot was never recovered. The vast fortune in cash and valuables taken from the boxes largely disappeared, scattered, and hidden away. And here the story takes on a layer of mystery that has fascinated people ever since. Because the robbery was suddenly, strangely, dropped from the news. In the days after the robbery, it had been front-page news. Then abruptly the coverage stopped. The story all but vanished from the papers. This led to a persistent and dramatic theory that the government had issued a secret request to the media, asking them to stop reporting on the case. And the reason, according to the rumors, was the contents of one of the safe deposit boxes. Boxes that may have held deeply sensitive, embarrassing secrets. The most sensational claim was that one box contained compromising photographs of a member of the royal family, and that the authorities wanted the matter buried. Other versions suggested the boxes held secrets belonging to powerful or criminal figures who had their own reasons for wanting the story to disappear. How much of this is true remains hotly debated. Some insist the media simply lost interest once the immediate drama had passed, as often happens with news. But the combination of the sudden silence and the mysterious safe deposit boxes has kept the rumors alive for decades, blurring the line between fact and legend. What we know for certain is remarkable enough. A gang tunneled into a London bank vault. An ordinary man overheard them on the radio, and yet they still escaped with a fortune. Most of the money was never found. Some of the truth, perhaps, was never told. And the contents of those boxes remain one of the great whispered mysteries of British crime. A tunnel of fortune, a voice on the radio, and a silence that followed. The strange and enduring story of the Baker Street robbery. On a dusty hilltop in the Middle East stand great rings of carved stone, raised by human hands. They are temples older than anything we thought possible. They were built 11,000 years ago, before farming, before writing, before the wheel, 6,000 years before the pyramids of Egypt. Hunter-gatherers with no metal tools carved and raised these giants, and no one knows exactly why. This is the story of Göbekli Tepe. In the south of modern-day Turkey, near the border with Syria, lies a region of rolling, sun-baked hills. For thousands of years, farmers have worked this ancient land. One of these hills was known to locals as Göbekli Tepe, which means roughly the hill with a belly or potbelly hill for its rounded shape. It looked like nothing special, just a low rise crowned with a lone mulberry tree, scattered with broken stones that farmers had long pushed aside. In fact, archaeologists had visited the hill decades earlier. They saw the broken limestone slabs and assumed they were the remains of a medieval cemetery. They moved on. It was an understandable mistake, but it meant that one of the most important discoveries in human history sat ignored just beneath the surface for many more years. The truth would not emerge until the 1990s, when a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt came to take another look at the overlooked hill. Schmidt had studied other ancient sites nearby, and when he examined the stones of Göbekli Tepe, he immediately sensed that something here was very wrong, or rather, very extraordinary. He realized these were not medieval gravestones at all. The worked limestone was far, far older. He later said that within minutes, he knew he had two choices: leave or spend the rest of his life here. He stared. Schmidt began to excavate, and what his team pulled from the earth would stun the world of archaeology and force historians to rewrite the story of civilization itself. As they dug, they uncovered enormous stone pillars standing upright, buried in the hill. And these were no rough, simple stones. Each pillar was shaped like a great letter T, with a long vertical shaft and a wide top. Some stood over 5 meters tall and weighed many tons. And they were carved. Across their surfaces marched a menagerie of animals, rendered in beautiful, confident relief. Foxes, snakes, scorpions, boars, vultures, and cranes. The carvings were skilled and deliberate, full of meaning we can only guess at. Some pillars even had arms and hands carved on their sides, as if they were great stone beings. These T-shaped pillars were arranged in circles, great rings of standing stones, with two especially large pillars rising at the center of each one. Ring after ring emerged from the hill. Göbekli Tepe was not a single structure, but a whole complex of these massive stone enclosures. It was clearly a place of great importance, a monumental site built with enormous effort and care. To Schmidt, it looked like nothing less than a temple. And that raised an enormous question. Because to build a temple like this, you need many things: planning, organization, a large workforce, a shared belief. All of that suggests a settled, complex society. The kind that, according to everything we thought we knew, did not yet exist when Göbekli Tepe was built. Because when the archaeologists dated the site, the results were almost impossible to believe. The oldest layers of Göbekli Tepe were built around 9,500 years before the Common Era. That is more than 11,000 years ago. Let that sink in. To put it in perspective, the famous pyramids of Giza are about 4,500 years old. Göbekli Tepe is more than twice as old as the pyramids. Stonehenge in England would not be raised for another 6,000 years after Göbekli Tepe was already standing. When these stone circles were built, the world was still deep in the Stone Age. The great civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus were unimaginably far in the future. There was no writing, no metal tools, no pottery, no wheel, and crucially, as far as we knew, no farming. The people of this time were hunter-gatherers. And this is the heart of why Göbekli Tepe is so revolutionary. It completely upends the accepted story of how civilization began. For a long time, the story went like this. First, humans learned to farm. Farming produced surplus food. Surplus food allowed people to settle in towns. And only then, once people had towns and free time and organization, could they build great monuments and temples. Religion and monuments came last as a product of civilization. Göbekli Tepe turns that idea on its head. Here was a monumental temple built by hunter-gatherers before farming had truly taken hold. It suggests that the urge to gather, to build, and perhaps to worship may have come first, and that this great shared effort may have driven people to settle down rather than the other way around. In other words, it may not have been farming that gave birth to religion and temples. It may have been the temple that gave birth to civilization. Some researchers believe that the need to feed the many workers who gathered to build Göbekli Tepe may have helped push people toward farming the wild grains that grew nearby. And remarkably, this very region is thought to be one of the places where wheat was first domesticated. The dawn of farming and this great temple sit side by side. So who were these people and how did they do it? With no metal tools, they quarried, carved, and raised stone pillars weighing as much as a modern truck. They shaped hard limestone using only stone tools, chipping away with incredible patience. They moved these giants across the landscape and stood them upright in careful arrangements. It would have taken hundreds of people working together, sharing food, and following a common plan and vision. This was a society far more organized than we ever expected for the age. But what did it all mean? What were the carvings of foxes, vultures, and scorpions for? Why these animals in these arrangements? We simply do not know. Without writing, the people of Göbekli Tepe left us no texts, no names, no explanations. Only the silent stones and their carved creatures. Some scholars think the site was tied to death and the afterlife, pointing to the vultures and other carvings. Others see a connection to the night sky and the stars. It may have been a place of pilgrimage, where scattered groups of people came together for great gatherings, feasts, and ceremonies before returning to their wanderings. And then there is perhaps the strangest detail of all. At some point, the people of Göbekli Tepe did something extraordinary. They buried it. Deliberately, they filled in the great stone enclosures with rubble and earth, covering the pillars and hiding the temple beneath the hill that gave it its name. Why would they bury the very thing they had worked so hard to create? It is one of the deepest puzzles of the site, and we have no certain answer. Perhaps it was an act of reverence, sealing the sacred site away. Perhaps beliefs changed. But in a strange way, that burial is why the temple survived so beautifully for us to find. Excavations continue to this day, and only a small fraction of the site has been uncovered. Ground surveys suggest many more stone circles still lie buried, waiting beneath the hill. There may be far more of Göbekli Tepe still hidden than has ever been revealed. The hill may hold its greatest secrets yet. What we have already found is enough to change everything. Göbekli Tepe proved that the people of the Stone Age were capable of breathtaking ambition, cooperation, and artistry. It pushed back the origins of monumental building by thousands of years and forced us to rethink the very birth of civilization, religion, and society. Raised by hunter-gatherers at the very dawn of our story, then buried, then lost, and found again after 11,000 years. The first great temple of humankind. Göbekli Tepe. Somewhere beneath the waves, the legend says, lies a lost world. A great and golden civilization, more advanced than any of its time. In a single day and a single night of catastrophe, it was swallowed by the sea and vanished from the earth forever. For more than 2,000 years, the world has searched for it. Was it real or only a dream? This is the story of Atlantis. The story of Atlantis does not come from sailors' rumors or dusty myths of unknown origin. It comes from one of the greatest thinkers of the ancient world. Around 360 years before the Common Era, the Greek philosopher Plato wrote two dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. And in them, he told the tale of Atlantis. Plato claimed the story was true and that it had been passed down a long chain. From Egyptian priests to the Greek statesman Solon, and finally down to Plato's own time. According to the story, the tale was ancient even then. The events it described had supposedly happened around 9,000 years before Solon's day. And the story Plato told was magnificent. He described a great island, larger than ancient Libya and Asia combined, lying out in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. On this island stood the kingdom of Atlantis, a powerful and wealthy naval empire, ruled by mighty kings descended, it was said, from the sea god Poseidon himself. The capital city was a marvel. It was built in rings, alternating bands of land and water, circling out from a central hill, connected by bridges and canals. At its heart stood a great temple to Poseidon, gleaming with silver and gold, and a metal the ancients called orichalcum, said to shine like fire. Plato described a land of abundance. Fertile plains, rich harvests, hot and cold springs, herds of animals, even elephants, and forests full of timber. The Atlanteans were great engineers and builders. They raised palaces, harbors, and docks, and dug enormous canals to bring ships into the heart of their city. Their power grew and their empire spread. According to Plato, Atlantis came to rule over many other islands and parts of the distant continents, building a vast dominion. For generations, the Atlanteans were noble and virtuous, ruling wisely, untouched by greed. They held to the divine nature passed down from their god ancestors. But over time, Plato wrote, that divine nature faded. The Atlanteans became corrupted by their own wealth and power. Greed and ambition took hold. No longer content with their vast empire, the Atlanteans set out to conquer the rest of the known world, sweeping eastward across the Mediterranean with their fleets and armies. And here in Plato's telling, they met their match. One city stood against the might of Atlantis. According to the story, it was ancient Athens. Against all odds, the Athenians and their allies resisted the invaders and ultimately defeated the great empire of Atlantis, freeing the conquered peoples. But the story does not end in triumph. It ends in catastrophe. For the gods, angered by the corruption of Atlantis, were about to deliver a final judgment. Plato wrote that there came violent earthquakes and floods. And in a single terrible day and night, the island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea and disappeared. An entire civilization gone beneath the waves. Its proud cities, its golden temples, its mighty fleets, all dragged down into the depths in an instant. And so, Plato says, the sea in that place became impassable, blocked by the mud and shoals left where the great island had sunk. Atlantis was lost to time. It is a breathtaking story. A golden empire brought low by its own pride and erased from the earth by the wrath of the gods. But here is the great question. Did any of it actually happen? Was Atlantis a real place, a true memory of a vanished civilization? Or was it something else entirely? This is the debate that has raged for over 2,000 years, ever since Plato first set down the tale. Many scholars believe Atlantis was never meant to be taken literally. They argue that Plato invented the story as a kind of fable, a teaching tool. In this view, Atlantis is a warning. It represents a powerful, arrogant civilization, while idealized Athens represents virtue and balance. The story is about pride, corruption, and downfall. It is striking that no earlier Greek writer ever mentions Atlantis. The story appears fully formed only in Plato's work, which makes some suspect he created it himself. Even Plato's own student, the great philosopher Aristotle, was reportedly skeptical, suggesting that the man who invented Atlantis had also made it sink. And there are real problems with taking the tale literally. The date Plato gives, around 11,000 years ago, places Atlantis deep in the Stone Age. There is no evidence that any advanced, city-building naval empire existed anywhere on Earth at that time. The scale and timing simply do not fit what we know. And yet the story refuses to die. Because many believe that even if Atlantis is a fable, it may be woven from threads of real events and real places. After all, Plato was writing in a world that remembered real catastrophes. Earthquakes, floods, and tsunamis were known to swallow cities. Such things truly happened. And so the hunt for a real-world inspiration for Atlantis has produced dozens of candidates, scattered across the globe. Some have looked far out into the Atlantic, as Plato's geography suggests, proposing islands or sunken lands in the deep ocean. But no convincing ruins have ever been found there. Others have placed Atlantis in the most exotic locations imaginable, from the Caribbean to Antarctica, but these ideas rest on speculation rather than evidence. But there is one theory that many scholars take seriously. It does not look across the Atlantic at all. It looks much closer to Plato's home in the Mediterranean. And it centers on a real catastrophe, one of the most violent events in the ancient world. The eruption of a volcano on the island we now call Santorini. In the Bronze Age, this island, also known as Thura, was home to a flourishing culture connected to one of the most advanced civilizations of the age. Then, around 3,500 years ago, the volcano at the heart of the island exploded in a colossal eruption, one of the largest in human history. The blast blew out the center of the island, which collapsed into the sea. It is thought to have triggered enormous tsunamis that swept across the region. And those waves may have devastated the heartland of a great seafaring people, the Minoans, who built a brilliant civilization on the island of Crete. The Minoans were everything Atlantis was said to be. A wealthy, powerful, sophisticated naval culture with grand palaces, advanced art, and mastery of the sea. After the eruption and the tsunamis, the Minoan civilization went into decline and eventually faded away, its glory lost. A great sea power brought down by a watery catastrophe. The parallels are striking. A magnificent island civilization destroyed by a natural disaster from the sea. Some believe the memory of this real event, distorted over centuries, became the legend of Atlantis. The numbers and the location were exaggerated as the story passed down the generations, the dates inflated, the island moved out into the ocean. But at its core may lie a true catastrophe. It is a compelling idea, and yet it remains a theory. We have no inscription, no artifact, nothing that says here was Atlantis. The connection is suggestive but unproven. And so the search goes on. To this day, explorers, scientists, and dreamers scour the seas and the sands, hoping to find some trace of the lost world. Whether it was a real civilization, a faded memory of a true disaster, or simply the most enduring fable ever told, Atlantis has never loosened its grip on our imagination. A golden empire lost beneath the waves that we cannot stop searching for. Perhaps that is the true power of Atlantis. The dream of a perfect world lost to time. Across a vast, empty desert in Peru, enormous shapes are carved into the earth. A hummingbird, a monkey, a spider, each one the size of a stadium. There are straight lines that run perfectly for miles across the sand. And the strangest thing of all is this. From the ground, you can barely see them. They can only truly be seen from high above. Yet they were made 2,000 years ago by people who could not fly. This is the mystery of the Nazca Lines. Our story takes place in southern Peru, in one of the driest places on the entire planet. A high, flat desert plateau between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific coast. This is a harsh and barren land. It receives almost no rain. The air is still, and the climate has barely changed for thousands of years. And that stillness is the key to our mystery, because this unchanging desert has preserved something remarkable for 2,000 years. The surface of this plateau is covered in a layer of reddish-brown stones and pebbles, darkened by time. And just beneath them lies pale, yellowish ground. Long ago, an ancient people discovered that by simply removing the dark stones, they could expose the lighter earth beneath, creating a pale line against the dark desert floor. It is a simple technique, but the ancient Nazca people used it to create something on a scale that staggers the imagination. These were the Nazca, a civilization that flourished in this region from around 2,000 years ago, building irrigation systems, pottery, and textiles in this unforgiving land. For centuries, their great works lay across the desert, largely unnoticed. It was not until the 20th century, with the coming of flight, that the world finally saw them. In the 1920s and 30s, as aircraft began to fly over the Peruvian desert, pilots looked down and saw something astonishing etched into the ground below. Lines, hundreds of them, running across the desert in every direction. Some short, some stretching for miles, straight as an arrow across the rugged terrain. There were great triangles and trapezoids, vast geometric shapes scraped into the earth, like enormous runways or fields of pale stone. And then, as more flights crossed the plateau, people began to notice that some of the lines were not just shapes. They were pictures. Enormous drawings of living things, traced in single, continuous lines across the desert floor. The Nazca had drawn a great gallery of figures, visible only from the sky. There is a hummingbird, its long beak and outstretched wings sprawling across the sand. There is a monkey with a strange, spiraling tail. There is a giant spider, a condor with a vast wingspan, a whale, a dog, a tree, and a curious figure with a round head, sometimes called the astronaut or the owl man. In total, the Nazca created hundreds of these designs. Dozens of animals and plants, and many hundreds more lines and geometric shapes spread across an area of hundreds of square miles. The figures are enormous. The largest stretch hundreds of feet across. The hummingbird alone is over 90 meters long. Some of the straight lines run for more than 10 miles. And here lies the first great puzzle. The figures are so large that, standing on the ground beside one, you would never recognize it. You would see only a shallow trench in the dirt. To see the hummingbird as a hummingbird, to take in the whole design, you have to be high in the air, looking straight down. But the Nazca had no aircraft, no balloons that we know of, no way to rise up and view their own creations from above. So why make giant pictures that they themselves could never properly see? This is the question that has haunted the Nazca Lines ever since they were rediscovered. Who were these images meant for? And why go to such enormous effort to make them? Before we explore the theories, there is one more astonishing fact. We now know the Nazca made these designs with remarkable precision and skill. The straight lines hold their course over miles, across hills and uneven ground, with astonishing accuracy. The curves of the animals flow in smooth, confident strokes. So how did they do it without flight, without modern tools? The answer, researchers believe, is actually simpler than the mystery suggests. To make the lines, the Nazca needed only to remove the dark surface stones and pile them along the edges, exposing the pale ground in between. The dry, windless climate did the rest, preserving them. For the straight lines, they likely used a simple but clever method. By placing wooden stakes and siding from one to the next, they could keep a line perfectly straight over great distances. For the animal figures, they may have first drawn a small design, then scaled it up onto the desert using ropes, stakes, and careful measurement, like a giant connect the dots. Experiments have shown that a small team of people, using only simple tools, could create even a large figure in a matter of days. So the how, while impressive, is not truly impossible. The Nazca did not need to fly. They needed only patience, planning, and a deep understanding of geometry. The real mystery is not how, but why. Why would a civilization pour such effort into vast images, laid out across the desert, that could never be seen whole from the ground? Over the years, many answers have been proposed. Some sensible, some scientific, and some wildly imaginative. One of the earliest serious theories came from researchers who believed the lines were a giant astronomical calendar. In this view, certain lines pointed to the rising and setting of the sun, the moon, or important stars, helping the Nazca track the seasons. But later studies found the alignments were weaker than hoped. A more widely accepted idea connects the lines to the Nazca's most precious and desperate need: water. In one of the driest places on Earth, water was everything. Many researchers believe the lines were deeply tied to rituals meant to summon rain and ensure the flow of water. Some of the lines do seem to point towards sources of water or to the mountains where water came from. And many of the animals, like the hummingbird and the spider, were linked in Andean belief to water and fertility. In this theory, the great figures and lines may have been part of sacred ceremonies. People may have walked along the lines in processions as a kind of moving prayer across the desert. And this offers an answer to the great riddle. Perhaps the images were not made to be seen by human eyes at all. Perhaps they were made to be seen by the gods looking down from above. Offerings to the deities of the sky and the mountains who controlled the life-giving water. Giant messages written in the earth addressed to the heavens. It is a powerful and moving idea. A people struggling to survive in a brutal desert, pouring their devotion into the very ground beneath their feet, reaching up to the gods. Of course, not everyone is content with the down-to-earth explanations. The Nazca Lines have long attracted far stranger theories. Most famously, some have claimed the lines were runways or signals for visitors from the stars, pointing to the figure they call the astronaut and the runway-like trapezoids. But these ideas crumble under scrutiny. The ground is far too soft for any aircraft, and there is no need to invoke the stars. The Nazca were perfectly capable of making the lines themselves. To credit aliens is, in a way, to insult the real achievement. The Nazca Lines are a monument to human ingenuity, devotion, and skill, not a sign of visitors from elsewhere. And the discoveries continue. Using modern technology, including drones and artificial intelligence, researchers keep finding new figures hidden in the desert, faded almost to nothing. With each new find, the gallery grows and our understanding deepens a little. But the full meaning of the Nazca Lines remains beyond our reach. We can explain how they were made. We can guess with good reason why. But we cannot read the minds of the people who knelt in that desert 2,000 years ago and gave shape to the earth. Giant prayers etched into the sand, meant for eyes high above that we are still trying to understand. The enduring riddle of the Nazca Lines. On a tiny island lost in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean stand nearly 1,000 giant figures of stone, gazing silently across the land. Some weigh as much as 80 tons. The people who made them had no machines, no metal tools, and no wheels. Yet they moved these giants for miles. How did they do it? And what happened to the people who carved them? This is the mystery of Easter Island. Far out in the South Pacific lies one of the most isolated places on the face of the earth. A small triangular island known to its people as Rapa Nui. To get a sense of just how remote it is, the nearest inhabited land is thousands of miles away. This is, by some measures, the loneliest inhabited island on the planet. It was given the name Easter Island by a Dutch explorer who arrived there on Easter Sunday in 1722. And what he found astonished him. Rising from this tiny, treeless island were hundreds of colossal stone figures. Giant human forms with heavy brows, long noses, and stern, brooding faces. To the Europeans, it seemed impossible. How could the people of such a small, remote, and seemingly simple island have created and raised these enormous monuments? These statues are known as moai, and they are the great enigma of Easter Island. The island had been settled centuries earlier by Polynesian voyagers, master navigators who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in canoes to reach this speck of land. Once there, this isolated society created something extraordinary. Over the centuries, they carved nearly 1,000 moai scattered across the island. The statues are huge. The average moai stands about 4 meters tall and weighs around 14 tons. But the largest are far bigger. One raised statue stands almost 10 meters high and weighs over 80 tons, as much as a fully loaded truck and trailer. Most of the moai stand on great stone platforms called ahu, placed around the edges of the island. And here is a key detail. Almost all of them face inward, away from the sea. They gaze in toward the island, watching over the villages and the people. The moai are believed to represent ancestors, powerful chiefs and forebears, transformed into guardians of their descendants. Their presence was sacred. The spirits of the ancestors were thought to live in the statues, protecting the living and bringing fertility to the land and the people. And there is a detail that surprises many people. The famous giant heads are not only heads. Many of the moai have full bodies, with torsos and arms. Over the centuries, many statues were gradually buried up to their shoulders by shifting earth, leaving only the heads visible, which is why they became famous as giant heads. So how were these giants made? The answer lies at a single place on the island. A volcanic crater called Rano Raraku. This crater was the Great Quarry, the birthplace of nearly all the moai. Its slopes are made of soft volcanic rock, perfect for carving. Using hard stone hand tools, the carvers chipped each moai directly out of the rock of the crater wall, shaping the face, the body, and the features in incredible detail. The statue was carved lying down, still attached to the bedrock by its back, until the front was nearly finished. Then it was carefully cut free. At the quarry today, you can still see this whole process frozen in time. Unfinished moai lie in the rock at every stage, abandoned mid-carving, as if the workers simply walked away. One giant never finished still lies in the quarry. Had it been completed and raised, it would have stood over 20 meters tall, more than twice the height of any other. But carving the moai was only half the challenge. Once finished, each statue had to be moved from the quarry to its platform, sometimes miles away across the island. And this is the heart of the mystery. How do you move an 80-ton statue for miles, with no machines, no metal, no draft animals, and no wheels? For a long time, it was assumed the islanders must have laid the statues on their backs and dragged them on wooden sledges and log rollers, using huge teams of people and ropes. This would have required vast amounts of timber and rope and the felling of countless trees. And as we will see, that idea ties into the island's tragic story. But the islanders themselves always had a different explanation. Their oral traditions said something remarkable. They said the Moai walked. For years, this was dismissed as legend. But in recent times, researchers decided to take the islanders' words seriously, and they made a stunning discovery. The Moai may have been moved upright in a standing position, rocked from side to side, so that they appeared to walk forward step by step. Using ropes attached to a standing replica, teams of people pulled it left and right in a rhythm, and the great statue rocked forward on its rounded base, walking across the ground. The shape of the Moai, with its forward-leaning lane and curved belly, turned out to be perfectly designed for exactly this kind of motion. The statues were built to walk. With just a small team and a few ropes, a Moai could be walked across the island. The islanders' ancient legend was, in a sense, the literal truth all along. But for all their achievements, the story of Easter Island took a dark turn. Because when Europeans arrived, they found a society that seemed a shadow of its former glory. The island was almost entirely treeless and barren, and many of the great Moai had been toppled, lying face down in the dirt, pulled from their platforms. What had happened? How had this society, capable of carving and walking giants, fallen so far? This question gave rise to one of the most famous and debated stories in history. The traditional theory is a grim cautionary tale, often called ecocide. The idea that the islanders destroyed themselves by destroying their environment. In this version, the island was once covered in lush palm forest. But over the centuries, the people cut down the trees to clear land, to build canoes, and to move the Moai. Eventually, the story goes, they cut down the very last tree. Without wood, they could no longer build canoes to fish, and the soil eroded away. Famine and conflict followed. In their desperation and anger, the people supposedly turned on their ancestors, toppling the Moai that had failed to protect them. A self-inflicted collapse, a warning for all humanity. It is a powerful and sobering story. But in recent years, many researchers have come to believe it is, at the very least, far too simple and perhaps largely wrong. The truth, the new evidence suggests, may be very different, and the islanders may have been far more clever and resilient than the tale of self-destruction allows. Yes, the forests vanished, but rats brought by the settlers, which ate the palm seeds, may have played a huge role alongside human clearing. The deforestation was not simply mindless. And far from collapsing in chaos, the islanders adapted ingeniously. They developed clever farming methods, using broken rock to enrich and protect the soil, and they endured. Studies suggest the population was relatively stable, and that the people sustained themselves successfully for centuries on their isolated home against incredible odds. The real catastrophe, many now argue, came from the outside. With the arrival of Europeans came new diseases, and later, slave raids that carried islanders away. These outside forces devastated the population, reducing the once thriving people of Rapa Nui to a tiny fraction of their former numbers. The collapse was not self-inflicted, but imposed. Today, the Moai have been raised once more. Restored to their platforms, the great ancestors again stand watch over the island, gazing in across the land of their descendants. They are a monument to one of the most remarkable feats of human determination and ingenuity. A people who crossed an ocean, carved giants, and walked them across an island. And who, against all odds, endured at the very edge of the world. The silent stone watchers of Rapa Nui, still gazing out across time. Easter Island. 3,000 years ago, the ancient world was ruled by great and connected civilizations, rich, powerful, and advanced. It was a golden age. Then, in the span of a single generation, almost all of them collapsed. Cities burned, empires vanished, whole kingdoms were wiped from the map. Writing was forgotten. A dark age fell across the world, and historians still argue over what destroyed it all. This is the Bronze Age collapse. To understand the scale of this catastrophe, we first have to picture the world before it fell. The world of the late Bronze Age, around 3,200 years ago. This was not a primitive world of scattered tribes. It was a sophisticated, interconnected web of powerful kingdoms and empires, stretching across the eastern Mediterranean and the Near East. In Egypt, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom ruled in splendor, at the height of their power and wealth. In Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, the mighty Hittite Empire commanded vast territories, rivaling Egypt itself as a superpower of the age. In Greece, the warlike Mycenaean civilization built great citadels with massive stone walls, the world later remembered in the legends of the Trojan War. Along the coast of the Near East stood rich trading cities like Ugarit, bustling ports where the goods and letters of the whole region passed through. And on the island of Cyprus and beyond lay the source of the age's most precious material, the metal that gave the era its name. Bronze. Bronze was everything. It was the metal of tools, of armor, of weapons. And here lies a crucial weakness hidden within this glittering world. Bronze is made by combining copper and tin. And tin, in particular, was rare. It had to be mined in distant places and traded across enormous distances. This meant that no single kingdom could make bronze on its own. To arm their soldiers and equip their people, every great power depended on a vast network of long-distance trade. And that is exactly what they had built. The late Bronze Age was a world of breathtaking connection, perhaps the first truly international age in history. Kings wrote letters to one another, addressing each other as brothers. They exchanged lavish gifts, arranged royal marriages, and forged treaties. Ships laden with copper, tin, gold, ivory, pottery, and spices crisscrossed the seas. Goods from one end of the known world reached the other. One shipwreck from this era, found on the seabed, carried goods from at least 7 different cultures, a snapshot of how deeply intertwined this world had become. It was a system of dazzling sophistication, but it was also fragile, because everything depended on everything else. And a system that connected can also collapse together. And collapse it did. Beginning around 1,200 years before the Common Era, this entire glittering world began to come apart. Across a span of just a few decades, city after city, kingdom after kingdom was struck down. And the pattern was terrifyingly consistent. Fire. All across the eastern Mediterranean, great cities were burned and destroyed. Many were never rebuilt. The archaeological record is a layer of ash and ruin. The mighty Hittite Empire, one of the superpowers of the age, simply ceased to exist. Its capital was burned and abandoned, its royal line vanished from history. The Mycenaean citadels of Greece were destroyed. Their palaces fell, their society shattered. The Greeks would forget how to write, plunging into a dark age for centuries. The rich trading city of Ugarit was wiped out so completely that it was never reoccupied. Its final moments are captured in a haunting letter, baked into a clay tablet by the very fire that destroyed it. In that last letter, the king of Ugarit cries out for help, writing that enemy ships have come, that his towns have been burned, and that the land is terrified. Then silence. The city fell. Only Egypt survived, and even Egypt was gravely wounded, never again to reach the heights it had known. The international world was gone. So what destroyed it? For a long time, much of the blame fell on a mysterious and shadowy force recorded in the Egyptian inscriptions. A confederation of raiders known only as the Sea Peoples. The Egyptians described waves of invaders coming by land and by sea, a great movement of peoples sweeping down upon the civilized world, destroying everything in their path. The pharaoh Rameses III recorded a desperate battle against them. He claimed that no land could stand before them, that they swept across the world, and that all were destroyed at once. He boasted of defeating them in a great clash, saving Egypt. But even in victory, the inscriptions reveal the sheer terror these peoples inspired. But here is the great puzzle. Who were the Sea Peoples? Where did they come from? And why were they on the move? The truth is, we still do not really know. The Egyptian names for them are debated, and they left no clear records of their own. They appear in history almost like a force of nature, then vanish. And this points to a deeper realization. The Sea Peoples may not have been the true cause of the collapse at all. They may have been a symptom of it. Because increasingly, historians believe the Sea Peoples were not a single invading nation, but a desperate mix of refugees, displaced peoples fleeing some greater catastrophe, looking for new homes. So if the Sea Peoples were themselves fleeing disaster, what was the disaster they fled? This is where the modern understanding of the collapse becomes truly fascinating. Most scholars no longer believe there was a single cause. Instead, they think the Bronze Age world was struck by many disasters at once. A perfect storm of catastrophes. The first ingredient was climate. Evidence suggests the region was hit by a long and severe drought, lasting for decades, perhaps even centuries. Crops failed. Famine spread. In a densely populated world dependent on good harvests, prolonged drought could bring kingdoms to their knees and set whole populations wandering in search of food. The second ingredient was earthquakes. The Eastern Mediterranean is a seismically active region, and evidence suggests a cluster of powerful earthquakes struck during this period. A series of quakes could have toppled cities and palaces, shattering the centers of power and adding to the chaos and suffering. The third ingredient was war and migration. As drought and disaster spread, desperate, hungry people were set in motion, raiding and migrating, becoming the Sea Peoples and others like them. And the fourth fatal ingredient was the system itself. That beautiful, interconnected world of trade was its own greatest weakness. Because everything depended on everything else, a blow to one part of the system rippled outward. When trade routes were cut, the bronze stopped flowing and the whole web began to unravel. Picture it as a chain of falling dominoes. Drought weakens the kingdoms. Earthquakes topple their cities. Famine drives people to migrate and raid. The raids and chaos cut the trade routes. The broken trade starves the survivors of bronze and resources. And each disaster makes every other disaster worse. No single blow brought down the Bronze Age world. It was the combination, striking all at once, that proved too much for even the mightiest empires to survive. It is sometimes called systems collapse, the failure of an entire interconnected civilization, and it remains one of history's great cautionary tales. A reminder that the more complex and connected a world becomes, the more spectacularly it can fall when too many things go wrong at once. The very networks that make a civilization rich and powerful can also carry its downfall from one corner of the world to the next. What followed the collapse was a dark age. Across the region, populations crashed, cities shrank to villages, and the art of writing was lost in many places for centuries. The glittering international world of the Bronze Age was gone, remembered only in fading legends, like the tales of heroes and the Trojan War, echoes of a lost golden age. An entire connected world, brilliant and fragile, brought down by a storm of catastrophes and lost to time. The day the ancient world ended. The Bronze Age collapse. Two smartly dressed men walked into one of the most exclusive jewelry stores in London. Minutes later, they walked out with 40 million pounds in diamonds. The security cameras caught it all. But there was a problem. The faces they recorded were not the robbers' real faces at all. Because before the heist, the men had visited a professional makeup artist. This is the story of the Graff Diamonds robbery. Our story takes place in London in August of 2009, in the heart of Mayfair, one of the wealthiest districts in the entire world. There on New Bond Street stood a branch of Graff Diamonds, a jeweler famous for selling some of the rarest and most expensive gems on Earth to the global elite. Graff is known for handling extraordinary stones, diamonds worth millions of pounds each, the kind owned by royalty, celebrities, and the super-rich. A store like this is, of course, heavily protected. Reinforced displays, security staff, panic buttons, and cameras covering every angle. And yet, this was not the first time Graff had been targeted. The very richness of its stock made it a magnet for the most ambitious thieves in the world. The gang that struck in 2009 understood that brute force alone would not be enough. To beat the cameras, they needed to become different people entirely. And so they turned to a tool more often found on a film set than in a robbery: professional theatrical makeup. Before the heist, the two men who would enter the store visited a makeup artist, reportedly under the pretense of being filmed for a music video. Over several hours, the artist applied detailed prosthetics and makeup, subtly altering the shape and features of their faces, complete with wigs and careful styling. Layers of latex changed the lines of their cheeks and noses. Skin tone was adjusted, hairlines reshaped. By the end, the men in the mirror were strangers, even to themselves. The result was a convincing transformation. The men who would appear on the security cameras would look nothing like their true selves. It was a clever and unusual move. Even if the cameras captured them perfectly, the faces on the footage would lead investigators nowhere. Dressed in sharp, expensive suits, the two disguised men looked exactly like the wealthy clients Graff was used to serving. They blended in perfectly. This was crucial. To rob a place like Graff, you first have to get through the door, and the door only opens for those who look like they belong. With their disguises in place and their fine clothes on, the pair approached the store, were buzzed inside, and the trap was set in motion. For a few moments, they were simply two more wealthy customers, admiring the dazzling stones on display. And then the robbery began. The men drew handguns and revealed their true purpose. The polite customers became armed robbers in an instant, taking control of the store. They moved quickly and methodically, knowing exactly which display cases held the most valuable stones, sweeping the finest diamonds into bags. In just a few minutes, they gathered an astonishing haul. Around 40 million pounds worth of jewelry, including dozens of priceless rings, necklaces, and gems. They took some of the finest stones in the entire store, the kind of pieces that take years to source and craft, swept away in a matter of moments. It was one of the largest gem robberies in British history. And the gang was not finished being clever. As they prepared to leave, the robbers took a member of staff hostage briefly, using her as cover to get safely out of the store and onto the street. Once outside, they released her, and to add to the chaos and cover their escape, one of them fired a shot into the air. The gunshot sent the busy Mayfair street into panic, buying the robbers precious seconds as they made for their getaway vehicle. They had a series of getaway cars arranged, planning to switch vehicles to throw off any pursuit, a classic technique of professional crews. With 40 million pounds in diamonds, they sped away from the scene, vanishing into the streets of London. The robbery itself had gone almost flawlessly. But the getaway, as so often happens, is where things began to go wrong. Because no plan, however clever, survives perfect contact with chaos. In the confusion of the escape and vehicle switches, the careful choreography started to break down, and the gang began to leave traces behind. A robbery can be planned for months in advance, but the getaway happens in real time, in traffic, in panic, with everything moving at once. It is the moment where even the best-laid plans tend to fall apart. The police investigation that followed was massive. A 40 million pound robbery in the heart of London demanded an enormous response. At first, the disguises seemed to have worked. The faces on the security footage did not match any known criminals. The makeup had done its job. But a heist is about far more than just faces. And the gang, in the rush of the getaway, had left behind the kind of evidence no disguise could hide. Inside the abandoned getaway vehicles, and at other points along the escape route, investigators found physical traces. The kind that modern forensic science lives for. Most importantly, the gang had made a classic, fatal mistake. They had left behind a mobile phone. A dropped phone is a goldmine for investigators. It can reveal contacts, calls, locations, and connections, peeling back the layers of a criminal network. The phone left behind in the Graff getaway gave the police a vital thread. And once they had a thread, they began to pull. The phone records and forensic evidence began to point toward specific individuals, linking them to the robbery despite the elaborate disguises. The makeup had fooled the cameras, but it could not erase the digital and forensic footprints the gang had left scattered behind them. Slowly, the investigation closed in. The men behind the masks were identified, one by one, despite never having shown their true faces in the store. Arrests followed. The members of the gang were tracked down and taken into custody, the elaborate scheme beginning to come apart. The evidence was strong. Forensics, phone data, and careful detective work tied the suspects to the robbery, despite all their efforts at concealment. The robbers were brought to trial, convicted, and handed long prison sentences for the audacious heist. It was a striking lesson. They had defeated the cameras with a brilliant disguise, but a single dropped phone and the traces of the getaway had been enough to undo them. Their cleverness in one area had been matched by carelessness in another. And in the world of high-stakes crime, one mistake is usually all it takes. But for all the convictions, the story ends, as so many great heists do, with a haunting absence. The diamonds. The vast majority of the 40 million pounds in stolen jewels was never recovered. The diamonds had vanished within hours of the robbery. Loose gems and recut diamonds are nearly impossible to trace. By the time the arrests were made, the stones were almost certainly long gone, sold into the underworld. A diamond, once cut down and reset, becomes a brand new stone with no history. The 40 million pounds in gems effectively ceased to exist, scattering into jewelry boxes around the world. Despite catching the robbers, the police could not recover the prize. The fortune in diamonds simply melted away into the global market, untraceable. The Graff Diamonds robbery remains one of the most spectacular gem heists in British history. A masterclass in disguise and audacity. Undone in the end not by the cameras they had so cleverly fooled, but by the ordinary, careless mistakes of the escape. A perfect disguise, a 40 million pound prize, and a dropped phone that brought it all crashing down. The Graff Diamonds robbery. Imagine an entire city, full of people going about their day, suddenly buried under a storm of ash and stone. And then, frozen in that exact moment, for nearly 2,000 years. The bread still in the ovens, the paintings still on the walls, and the haunting shapes of the people themselves captured forever in their final moments. It is the most complete window we have into the ancient world, a city that died and was perfectly remembered. This is the story of Pompeii. In the 1st century of the Common Era, the Roman Empire was at its height. And in the south of Italy, near the Bay of Naples, stood the prosperous city of Pompeii. Pompeii was a busy, wealthy town of perhaps 15 to 20,000 people. A place of commerce, leisure, and Roman life in full bloom. Its streets were paved with stone, worn by the wheels of countless carts. Stepping stones let people cross without dirtying their feet in the muddy roads. There were grand houses with beautiful courtyards and gardens, their walls covered in vivid frescoes, paintings of gods, myths, and everyday scenes. There were public baths, a forum, temples, and a great amphitheater where crowds gathered to watch gladiators fight. There were shops, bakeries, and taverns. Counters with holes where pots of hot food were served, the ancient world's version of fast food, lined the streets. The walls of the city are covered in graffiti. Election notices, advertisements, jokes, insults, and declarations of love, the unfiltered voices of ordinary Romans. Pompeii was, in short, an ordinary, thriving Roman city. Its people had no idea that they were living in the shadow of a monster. That monster was Mount Vesuvius, the great mountain that loomed over the bay. To the people of Pompeii, it was simply a mountain, green and fertile on its slopes. They grew grapes and olives on its rich volcanic soil. They did not understand that Vesuvius was a volcano and that it had been sleeping for centuries, building its strength. The Romans had no real concept of what a volcano was. There had been no major eruption in living memory. The danger was completely invisible to them. There had been warning signs had they known how to read them. Years earlier, a powerful earthquake had badly damaged the city, and tremors were not uncommon. In the days before the disaster, small earthquakes shook the region, and springs and wells reportedly dried up. These were the volcanoes stirring awake. But to the people of Pompeii, earthquakes were just a fact of life. They had no reason to flee. And so the city carried on, right up until the morning everything changed. The eruption is traditionally dated to August of the year 79, though some evidence suggests it may have been autumn. Whatever the date, the catastrophe was the same. Around midday, Mount Vesuvius exploded. With a force many times greater than an atomic bomb, it blasted a towering column of ash, rock, and gas high into the sky. The column rose tens of kilometers into the air, spreading into a vast, dark cloud. A witness across the bay described it as looking like a giant umbrella pine tree of smoke. That witness was a young man named Pliny the Younger, whose letters describing the eruption survive to this day, giving us a rare eyewitness account of the disaster. As the wind carried the cloud toward Pompeii, the sky over the city turned black. And then it began to rain. Not water, but pumice. Light, frothy volcanic stone. The pumice fell for hours, piling up in the streets, on the rooftops, ever deeper. People sheltered indoors or tried to flee, struggling through the strange, choking storm. As the pumice accumulated, roofs began to collapse under the weight, crushing those who had taken shelter beneath them. The city was being slowly buried alive. Many people did escape during these early hours, fleeing the city while they still could. But thousands stayed, hoping to wait out the disaster, or simply unable to leave. Then, in the early hours of the next morning, the eruption entered its deadliest phase. The towering column of ash could no longer hold itself up, and it collapsed. This unleashed the most terrifying force of all. A pyroclastic flow. a superheated avalanche of gas, ash, and rock racing down the mountain at incredible speed. These surges moved faster than a person could run, at temperatures of hundreds of degrees. Nothing in their path could survive, and Pompeii lay directly in their way. The pyroclastic surges swept over Pompeii, killing everyone who remained almost instantly. The intense heat and choking gas ended thousands of lives in moments. Then the flows buried the city. By the time the eruption finally ended, Pompeii lay under several meters of ash and pumice. The entire city had vanished from the surface of the earth. The nearby town of Herculaneum suffered an even more extreme fate, buried under even deeper, hotter material. Whole communities around the bay were wiped from existence. And here is the terrible irony at the heart of the story. The very thing that destroyed Pompeii also preserved it perfectly for the future. The thick blanket of ash sealed the city away from air and moisture. Beneath it, Pompeii was protected from the decay that erases almost all of the ancient world. Buildings stood with their walls and paintings intact. Objects sat where they had been dropped. Food remained on tables and in ovens. It was a moment in time sealed in a capsule of ash. And then slowly Pompeii was forgotten. The survivors moved on. New generations grew up. The very location of the buried city faded from memory for centuries. It was not until the 18th century that Pompeii was truly rediscovered, when workers digging in the area began to uncover ancient walls and treasures. As archaeologists dug, they realized they had found something miraculous. Not just ruins, but a whole Roman city, frozen at the instant of its death. Street by street, house by house, Pompeii emerged back into the light. The frescoes were still bright with color. The mosaics still gleamed on the floors. They found the forum, the baths, the brothel, the bakeries with carbonized loaves of bread still inside. They could read the graffiti scratched on the walls 2,000 years ago. Pompeii gave historians something almost no other site could. A complete, unedited snapshot of ordinary Roman life in all its detail, beauty, and humanity. We learned how Romans ate, worked, shopped, worshipped, and amused themselves, not from grand official histories, but from the everyday city itself, captured whole. But the most powerful and most haunting discovery was still to come, because Pompeii also preserved its people. As the excavators dug, they sometimes found mysterious empty spaces, cavities in the hardened ash. And a brilliant archaeologist realized what they were. The ash had hardened around the bodies of the victims. Over the centuries, the bodies decayed away, leaving perfect, hollow molds in the shape of each person. By carefully pouring plaster into these cavities, the archaeologists could create casts. Exact copies of the victims, captured in their final positions. The results are deeply moving and heartbreaking. We see people crouched, shielding their faces from the heat and ash. Families huddled together. A person clutching their belongings. We see a dog still chained, twisting in its final moments. We see the postures of fear, of resignation, of people trying to protect those they loved 2,000 years ago. These casts collapse the distance of time. The people of Pompeii stop being abstract ancient Romans and become human beings just like us, caught in a moment of terror. Today, Pompeii is one of the most visited and most studied archaeological sites in the world. And excavations continue, still uncovering new treasures and new stories. It remains our single greatest window into the daily life of the ancient world. A whole city and its people preserved by the very disaster that destroyed them. A reminder of the fragility of life and the strange way that catastrophe can also become a kind of immortality. The city frozen in time. Pompeii. Deep in the jungles of Central America stand the ruins of great cities. Towering stone pyramids, grand palaces, and sprawling plazas, once home to tens of thousands. Then, over the span of about a century, the people walked away. The cities fell silent, and the rainforest crept in to swallow them whole. What made one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world abandon its greatest cities? This is the mystery of the Maya collapse. First, let us clear up a common misconception. The Maya did not vanish. The Maya people are very much alive today, millions of them across Mexico and Central America. What collapsed was not the people, but their classic civilization. A golden age of great cities, kings, and monuments that came to a dramatic end over 1,000 years ago. The Maya civilization arose in the tropical lowlands of what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, flourishing for many centuries. During their classic period from around 250 to 900 in the Common Era, the Maya reached extraordinary heights of culture and achievement. They built towering step pyramids that rose above the jungle canopy, grand palaces, ball courts, and observatories, all without metal tools or the wheel for construction. They were brilliant astronomers, tracking the sun, moon, and planets with remarkable accuracy and creating calendars of astonishing sophistication. They developed the most advanced writing system in the ancient Americas, a complex script of hieroglyphs that recorded their history, their kings, and their gods. And they were master mathematicians who understood the concept of zero and worked with enormous numbers, long before many other cultures of the world. This was not a single unified empire, but a landscape of competing city-states. Powerful cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Kapan, and Palenque, each ruled by its own dynasty of kings. These cities were ruled by god-kings, powerful divine rulers who connected their people to the gods and were expected to ensure prosperity, victory, and above all, reign. The kings raised carved stone monuments called stelae, recording their reigns, their conquests, and their rituals in proud detail. At its height, the Maya world was densely populated. Millions of people lived across the lowlands, supported by sophisticated farming carved out of the demanding jungle environment. And this is a crucial point. The Maya heartland was not an easy place to feed millions of people. The soil was thin and there were few rivers or lakes. The region depended heavily on seasonal rains. To survive, the Maya built vast reservoirs and canals to capture and store water through the dry season. Their entire civilization, with its dense cities and millions of mouths to feed, balanced on the reliable arrival of the rains. This dependence would prove to be their great vulnerability. In a good year, the system fed a thriving population. But it left almost no margin for error and almost no defense against a sky that simply refused to rain. For centuries, the system worked and the Maya flourished. But then, beginning around the 8th and 9th centuries, something began to go terribly wrong. Across the southern Maya lowlands, the great cities began to falter and then to fail. The collapse did not happen everywhere at once, but it spread city by city. The signs are written in the monuments themselves. The Maya carefully recorded dates on their stelae. And in city after city, those dates simply stop. The last monument is raised. The last date is carved. And then silence. No more kings, no more inscriptions, no more grand construction. The great building projects ceased. The palaces emptied. The plazas, once crowded with people, fell quiet. The institution of the god-king itself collapsed. And the populations vanished from these cities. In many areas, the number of people fell drastically, by some estimates by 90% or more, over a relatively short time. People died or moved away, or both. The dense heartland of the classic Maya world emptied out. And the jungle, ever patient, began to reclaim the abandoned cities. Over the centuries, trees grew through the plazas. Vines wrapped the pyramids. The great stone temples were swallowed by green, hidden so well that some were not rediscovered for 1,000 years. So what happened? What could bring down such a brilliant and successful civilization? For a long time, it was a deep mystery. But modern science has revealed powerful clues. And the leading answer points to the Mayas' greatest dependency: water, specifically a catastrophic and prolonged drought. Scientists have studied ancient climate records, locked in cave formations, lake sediments, and other natural archives that preserve a history of the region's rainfall. And the records reveal that during the very period of the collapse, the Maya lowlands were struck by a series of severe droughts, some of the worst in thousands of years. For a civilization balanced on the edge, utterly dependent on seasonal rain to feed its millions, a decades-long drought would have been catastrophic. The reservoirs would have dried up. The crops would have failed year after year. Famine would have spread through the crowded cities. And here, the role of the god-kings becomes important. The kings had built their power on the promise that they could ensure the rains and the harvests through their connection to the gods. When the rains failed and the people starved, that promise was broken. The authority of the kings, the very foundation of Maya society, would have shattered. Faith in the rulers and the gods collapsed. And with it, the social order that held the great cities together began to come undone. But drought was likely not the only factor. As resources grew scarce, the competition between the rival city-states would have turned ever more desperate and violent. The Maya had always waged war, but in the final years, the warfare seems to have intensified, growing more destructive as cities fought over dwindling land and water. There may also have been environmental damage of the Mayas' own making. To feed their huge population and fuel their building, they cleared vast areas of forest. This deforestation may have worsened soil erosion and even made the drought more severe, as the loss of trees reduced rainfall and dried out the land further. So the collapse was likely a perfect storm. Severe drought, failed harvests, overpopulation, environmental strain, broken faith in the kings, and escalating warfare, all feeding on each other. Each pressure made the others worse, until the whole system, brilliant but overstretched, finally broke apart under the strain. The people, faced with starvation and chaos, did the only sensible thing. They left. They abandoned the great cities and scattered to areas where they could survive. And this is the part of the story that is so often forgotten. The collapse was not the end of the Maya. It was a transformation. While the southern cities fell, Maya civilization continued and even thrived elsewhere, especially in the northern Yucatan, with great cities like Chichen Itza. The Maya adapted, moved, and rebuilt. Their culture, their language, and their descendants endured, all the way to the present day. When Spanish conquerors arrived centuries later, they found Maya peoples still living across the region, still speaking their languages, still keeping their traditions alive. Today, millions of Maya people carry on that ancient heritage. The civilization changed, but the people never disappeared. They are still here. What was truly lost was the classic world of the god-kings, the great lowland cities, and the golden age that the jungle now guards in silence. The knowledge of how to read their writing was nearly lost too, and only in recent decades have scholars finally learned to decipher the ancient Maya script and hear their voices again. The Maya collapse is one of history's most important cautionary tales. A brilliant society undone in part by climate, in part by its own pressure on the land. It is a sobering reminder that no civilization, however advanced, is immune to the forces of drought, environment, and its own overreach. The great cities still stand in the jungle, silent and majestic, monuments to a golden age that the rains, in the end, could not sustain. The Maya collapse. On a windswept plain in southern England stands a ring of colossal stones, some taller than a house and heavier than a truck. It was built 5,000 years ago by people with no metal tools, no riding, and no wheels. Some of the stones were hauled from mountains 150 miles away. Who raised these giants? How, and above all, why? It is the most famous ancient mystery on Earth. This is the story of Stonehenge. On Salisbury Plain, a wide stretch of open grassland in the county of Wiltshire, England, stands the most famous prehistoric monument in the world. Stonehenge, a great circle of standing stones, instantly recognizable, and yet, even after centuries of study, still wrapped in deep mystery. When people first see it, they are often struck by two things: its age and the sheer size of the stones. This is a monument from the very depths of prehistory. Stonehenge is around 5,000 years old. It was already ancient when the Romans arrived in Britain. It is older than the Great Pyramid of Egypt. When it was built, the people of Britain were in the Stone Age. They had no metal, no riding, no wheels for transport, and yet they created this. And they left us no records, no texts, no names, no explanation of what it was for. The builders are silent. We have only the stones themselves and the clues buried around them. Everything we know, we have pieced together through archaeology, painstakingly reading the ground and the stones for the story they hold. And the first thing that archaeology tells us is that Stonehenge was not built all at once. It was created in stages over a span of around 1,500 years. It evolved across many generations. The Stonehenge we see today is the result of centuries of building, rebuilding, and rearranging by different groups of people. The earliest stage, around 5,000 years ago, was not stone at all. It was a great circular earthwork, a bank and a ditch, dug into the chalk with tools of antler and bone. Within this early enclosure, archaeologists found a ring of pits. And in many of them, they found something solemn: cremated human remains. In fact, Stonehenge is one of the largest known burial grounds of its time in Britain. From its very beginning, it was a place deeply connected to the dead. Centuries later came the next great stage, the one that made Stonehenge famous: the arrival of the giant stones. These were arranged into the iconic shapes we know. A great outer circle of standing stones, capped with horizontal lintels, and inside it, a horseshoe of even larger stone arches. These stone arches, two uprights with a lintel across the top, are called trilithons. The largest once stood over 7 meters tall, a soaring gateway of solid rock. And there are actually two very different kinds of stone at Stonehenge. Understanding them is the key to one of its greatest mysteries. The largest stones are called sarcens. These are immense blocks of hard sandstone, the giants of the monument, some weighing around 25 tons or more. The sarcens came from a source perhaps 15 to 25 miles away. Moving 25-ton stones even that far with Stone Age technology is a staggering feat. But it is the smaller stones, called bluestones, that pose the deeper puzzle. They are smaller, only a few tons each, but their origin is astonishing. Geologists have traced the bluestones to a very specific place: the Preseli Hills in West Wales. That is around 150 miles from Stonehenge. Let that sink in. 5,000 years ago, people transported dozens of multi-ton stones across 150 miles of hills, rivers, and forest to this one spot. Why go to such incredible effort to bring these particular stones from so far away when there was plenty of stone closer to hand? It suggests the blue stones held some special, sacred meaning. Some researchers even believe the blue stones may have first formed an earlier stone circle in Wales, which was later dismantled and carried to Salisbury Plain to be raised again. So how did they move these giants? This is one of the great questions, and while we cannot be certain, experiments have shown it is well within human power. The most likely method for the heavy sarcens was sheer muscle. Teams of people, perhaps hundreds, hauling the stones on wooden sledges over rollers or greased timber tracks. Modern experiments have shown that with enough people, ropes, and wooden sledges, even very large stones can be moved across land, a few miles at a time. The distant blue stones may have traveled partly by water, floated on rafts along rivers and the coast, then dragged the rest of the way overland. Then came the hardest part: raising the stones upright and lifting the heavy lintels on top of them to create the famous arches. To stand a stone upright, the builders likely dug a pit, slid one end in, and hauled the stone vertical with ropes and levers, then packed the base tight. The lintels may have been raised gradually on wooden platforms, lifted a little at a time, or hauled up earthen ramps, then levered into place atop the uprights. And the joinery is remarkable. The stones were shaped with carved knobs and hollows, like woodworking joints, locking the lintels securely onto the uprights. This was not a rough pile of rocks. It was a carefully engineered structure, designed and shaped with great skill and intention. Which brings us to the deepest question of all. Why? Why did Stone Age people pour generations of effort into building Stonehenge? What was it for? We do not know for certain. But the stones themselves offer a powerful clue, written in the movement of the sun. Because Stonehenge is carefully aligned to the solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year. This is its most famous and certain feature. On the morning of the summer solstice, the sun rises in line with the monument's main axis. And on the winter solstice, the sun sets along that same axis. This was clearly deliberate. Stonehenge is, among other things, a giant marker of the sun's yearly journey, tied to the turning of the seasons. Many believe the winter solstice was the most important. A time to mark the death and rebirth of the year, the turning point from darkness back toward the light. Evidence of great feasts nearby, held in midwinter, suggests people gathered at Stonehenge in huge numbers at this sacred time, traveling from across the land. And given its deep connection to burials and the dead, many see Stonehenge as a great temple of the ancestors. A place linking the living, the dead, the sun, and the cycle of the year. It may have been a place of ceremony, of pilgrimage, of healing, and of communion with the dead and the heavens, all at once. A cathedral of the Stone Age. And who built it? Not primitive savages, but skilled, organized, and deeply spiritual people, capable of extraordinary cooperation across vast distances and many generations. The construction of Stonehenge would have required not just labor, but leadership, planning, shared belief, and the ability to bring great numbers of people together for a common purpose. Recent studies of remains found nearby suggest people and animals traveled to Stonehenge from far across Britain. It was a monument that united a whole island. Far from being the work of an isolated tribe, Stonehenge may have been a great unifying project, a shared sacred center for the scattered peoples of ancient Britain. And yet, for all we have learned, the heart of Stonehenge remains a mystery. We can describe how it was built and guess at why, but we cannot truly enter the minds of its makers. What exact beliefs drove them, what rituals they performed, what they felt as they stood within the great circle, all of that is lost to time. A ring of giants raised by silent hands 5,000 years ago, still standing, still aligned to the sun, still keeping its secrets. Stonehenge. High in the mountains of Peru, wrapped in mist and perched on a narrow ridge between two soaring peaks, lies one of the most beautiful places ever built by human hands. A whole city of perfectly fitted stone, built without mortar, without iron tools, and without the wheel. Then abandoned and hidden from the world for centuries. The Spanish conquerors who destroyed the Inca never even found it. This is the story of Machu Picchu, the lost city in the clouds. To understand Machu Picchu, we first have to understand the people who built it. The Inca, who created the largest empire in the history of the Americas. At its peak, the Inca Empire stretched for thousands of miles along the spine of the Andes Mountains, ruling over millions of people across western South America. And they achieved this without some of the tools we consider essential. They had no writing system as we know it, no iron, and famously, no practical use of the wheel in their mountainous terrain. Yet they built an extraordinary civilization. A vast network of roads, terraced farms carved into mountainsides, and magnificent stone architecture that still astonishes us today. They were master engineers and stoneworkers, able to shape and fit enormous blocks of stone with breathtaking precision, all by hand. And around the middle of the 15th century, under one of their greatest rulers, the Inca undertook the construction of a remarkable mountain retreat. Machu Picchu. It was built on a high ridge, around 2,400 meters above sea level, in a spectacular but incredibly difficult location. Surrounded by steep peaks and deep valleys, with the sacred river winding far below, it is a place of staggering natural beauty and staggering practical challenge. Because building a city on a remote mountain ridge poses enormous problems. How do you create flat, stable ground? How do you keep it from sliding down the mountain? How do you feed its people and manage the water? The Inca solved every one of these challenges with brilliant engineering, much of it hidden beneath the beautiful surface we see today. To create level ground on the steep slope, they built a vast system of terraces. Stepped platforms held in place by stone retaining walls, marching down the mountainside. These terraces were not just for farming. They were essential structural engineering, stabilizing the steep slopes and preventing the whole site from collapsing in landslides. Beneath the terraces, the Inca built deep layers of crushed rock and gravel for drainage. In a place of heavy mountain rains, managing water was a matter of survival. They constructed channels and fountains to carry fresh spring water through the city and to drain away the heavy rainfall before it could damage the foundations. It is estimated that a huge portion of the construction effort at Machu Picchu went into these invisible foundations and drainage works, the unseen genius that holds the city up. And all of this was achieved with stone hauled and shaped by human muscle alone, on a remote peak, without machines or draft animals to help. But it is the stonework itself that most amazes visitors. Because the finest Inca walls are built without any mortar at all. The stones were cut and shaped so precisely that they fit together perfectly, locking into one another like a three-dimensional puzzle, with no gaps between them. The famous saying is that you cannot fit a blade of grass, or even a sheet of paper, between the stones of the best Inca walls. The fit is that perfect. Achieving this took incredible skill and patience. The stonemasons shaped each block with harder stones and bronze tools, testing and refining the fit again and again. And this technique was not just beautiful. It was practical genius, because Peru is a land of earthquakes. When an earthquake strikes, mortared walls crack and crumble. But the Incas' mortarless walls can shift and settle, the stones dancing slightly and then locking back into place. This is why so much Inca stonework has survived earthquakes that toppled later buildings. Their architecture was engineered brilliantly for the unstable ground it stood on. Centuries later, engineers would study these very walls to understand how the Inca achieved what modern builders still find difficult. Machu Picchu contains around 200 structures. Temples, homes, storehouses, plazas, and royal residences, all woven into the dramatic mountain landscape. Every terrace and stairway was placed with deliberate care, fitted precisely to the natural contours of the ridge. So what was Machu Picchu actually for? For a long time, this was a deep mystery. But scholars now have a leading answer. The best evidence suggests it was a royal estate, a grand mountain retreat built for the Inca emperor and his court, a place of relaxation, ceremony, and religious importance. Here the ruler could escape the capital, hunt in the surrounding hills, and honor the gods far above the everyday world. It would have been a kind of country palace, where the ruler and the nobility could escape the capital, surrounded by sacred mountains and stunning views. But it was also deeply spiritual. Many of its finest structures align with the sun and the stars, tied to the Incas' sophisticated astronomy and religion. There is a famous carved stone, the Intihuatana, thought to be linked to the sun and the solstices, and a temple where on key days, sunlight streams perfectly through a window onto a sacred stone. The surrounding mountains themselves were sacred to the Inca, and Machu Picchu was positioned to honor and align with them. It was a place where the earthly and the divine met. Only around 1,000 people are thought to have lived there, many of them servants and workers supporting the royal court and the religious life of the site. For perhaps a century, Machu Picchu flourished as this glittering royal sanctuary in the clouds. And then, quite suddenly, it was abandoned. The reason lies in one of history's great catastrophes: the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in the early 16th century. The Spanish conquest shattered the Inca Empire. War, and especially the devastating diseases the Europeans brought, killed enormous numbers of people across the Andes. As the empire collapsed and its population was decimated, remote sites like Machu Picchu could no longer be maintained. Its people left and the city was abandoned. But here is the remarkable thing. The Spanish never found Machu Picchu. Hidden high in the mountains off the main roads, it escaped their notice entirely. While the Spanish looted and destroyed Inca sites across the empire, Machu Picchu was spared simply because they never knew it was there. And so the city was left to the mountains. The jungle slowly crept over it. Vegetation covered the terraces and temples, and Machu Picchu vanished into the green. For around 400 years, it slept in the clouds, known only to a handful of local farmers who lived and worked in the area. Then, in 1911, an American explorer named Hiram Bingham came to the region, searching for a different lost Inca city. Local people led him up the mountain, and there, beneath the tangled vegetation, he found the magnificent ruins of Machu Picchu, largely intact. Bingham brought the site to the attention of the wider world, and its astonishing beauty made it an instant sensation. The lost city in the clouds had been found. In the years that followed, the vegetation was cleared, the site was studied and restored, and Machu Picchu emerged once more in all its glory. Its remarkable state of preservation, thanks to never being found by the Spanish, makes it one of the most complete and beautiful Inca sites in existence. It has given us an irreplaceable window into the genius of the Inca, a people who built a masterpiece on a mountaintop and aligned it with the heavens. Today, Machu Picchu is one of the most famous and beloved places on Earth, named one of the new 7 wonders of the world, and visited by people from every corner of the globe. It stands as a breathtaking testament to a civilization that, with stone and muscle and brilliance, built a city in the clouds and then watched it slip into legend. Lost to the world for 4 centuries, preserved by the very mountains that hid it, and found again at last. The lost city in the clouds, Machu Picchu. Around 4,500 years ago, one of the largest and most advanced civilizations on Earth flourished across South Asia. And most people have never even heard of it. It had carefully planned cities, advanced plumbing, and standardized weights and measures. Yet it left behind no grand monuments to god kings and a written language we still cannot read. And then this great civilization quietly faded away. This is the story of the mysterious Indus Valley civilization. When we think of the great early civilizations, we usually think of Egypt with its pyramids or Mesopotamia with its ziggurats. But there was another, just as old and in some ways more advanced. It arose along the valley of the Indus River and its tributaries, across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, beginning around 5,000 years ago. It is sometimes called the Harappan civilization, after Harappa, one of its first discovered cities. And its scale was enormous. At its height, the Indus Valley civilization covered a vast area, larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, with a population perhaps in the millions. It included hundreds of settlements, from small villages to great cities. The two largest, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, were among the first true cities anywhere on Earth. And yet, for thousands of years, this entire civilization was completely forgotten. Buried, lost, and unknown, even to the people living above its ruins. It was only rediscovered in the 20th century, when archaeologists excavating ancient mounds realized they had found not just an old town, but a vast, lost civilization. And what they uncovered was astonishing, because these were not crude early settlements. They were among the most carefully planned cities in the entire ancient world. Walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, and you find something that feels almost modern. The city was laid out on a grid, with streets crossing at right angles. This kind of careful urban planning, with organized blocks and wide main streets, suggests a society with strong central organization and a clear shared vision. The buildings were made of standardized, kiln-fired bricks, all in consistent proportions, used across the whole vast civilization. A remarkable degree of standardization. But the most impressive feature of all was the plumbing. The Indus cities had some of the most advanced water and sanitation systems of the ancient world. Many homes had their own wells, bathing areas, and even private toilets, connected to a sophisticated system of covered drains running along the streets. Wastewater was carried away through these covered drains, keeping the city clean. This is a level of urban sanitation that much of the world would not achieve again for thousands of years. At Mohenjo-daro, there is a famous structure known as the Great Bath. A large, watertight, brick-lined pool, possibly used for ritual bathing. It is a marvel of engineering, carefully sealed to hold water, with steps leading down into it. It speaks of a society that valued cleanliness, ritual, and public works. But here is where the Indus civilization becomes truly mysterious. Because for all its sophistication, it is missing things we expect from a great ancient power. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, we find enormous palaces, royal tombs stuffed with treasure, and giant monuments glorifying powerful kings and conquering armies. But in the Indus Valley, archaeologists have found almost none of this. No grand palaces, no royal tombs, no giant statues of god-kings towering over the people. There are no obvious signs of a powerful ruling class living in luxury while the masses toiled. The homes, while varied, do not show the extreme gulf of wealth seen elsewhere. And perhaps most strikingly, there is very little evidence of warfare. Few weapons designed for battle, few fortifications clearly built for war, few depictions of conquest or violence. This has led to a fascinating, if debated, idea that the Indus Valley may have been a remarkably peaceful, equal society, without kings, without slaves, without constant war. Some imagine it as a civilization run by merchants and councils rather than warrior kings, focused on trade, craft, and orderly city life rather than conquest and glory. We should be careful not to romanticize it too much. But the contrast with other ancient powers is real and striking. The Indus Valley feels strangely, refreshingly different. And yet, frustratingly, we cannot ask them about it. Because the single greatest barrier to understanding the Indus Valley is that we cannot read their writing. The Indus people did have a script. We have found thousands of short inscriptions, mostly on small carved seals, made of stone, often featuring beautiful animal figures. These seals show creatures like bulls, elephants, tigers, and a mysterious unicorn-like animal, alongside rows of symbols. They are exquisite and utterly silent. Despite a century of effort by brilliant scholars, the Indus script has never been deciphered. We do not know what language it records or what the symbols mean. The inscriptions are mostly very short, just a few symbols each. There is no long text, no equivalent of the Rosetta Stone, no bilingual key to unlock the meaning. Some scholars even debate whether it is true writing at all, or some other kind of symbolic system. The argument continues unresolved. And so the Indus people cannot speak to us. We do not know their names, their kings, their gods, their stories, or what they called themselves. Their voices are lost. We can admire their cities and their craftsmanship, but their inner world remains a closed book. It is one of the great frustrations of archaeology. And then there is the final mystery. Because this great, sophisticated civilization did not last forever. Around 3,900 years ago, it began to decline. The great cities were gradually abandoned. The careful urban planning broke down. The sophisticated drainage and standardization faded. The script fell out of use. The population dispersed, scattering into smaller villages. The grand, unified civilization unraveled, and the Indus Valley sank into a kind of dark age. For a long time, the favorite theory was a violent invasion. The idea that warlike newcomers swept in and destroyed the cities. But the evidence for a great invasion is weak. There are no clear signs of widespread war and massacre at the moment of collapse. The decline looks more gradual, more like a slow fading than a sudden conquest. So if it was not invasion, what was it? Increasingly, scientists point to the one force that gives life to a river civilization and can take it away. Water and climate. The entire civilization depended on its rivers and the seasonal rains that fed them, watering the crops that supported millions of people. And around the time of the collapse, the climate of the region appears to have shifted. The vital monsoon rains weakened, and a long period of drying set in. Rivers may have shifted course or dried up. One great river that once flowed through the region is thought to have dwindled away, taking the settlements along it with it. As the water failed and the harvests shrank, the great cities could no longer sustain their large populations. People were forced to move eastward and toward more reliable water. It was not a sudden apocalypse, but a slow, grinding decline, as the environmental foundation of the civilization crumbled beneath it over generations. The people did not vanish. Their descendants lived on, and their legacy flowed into the later cultures of South Asia. But the great unified civilization of the Indus was gone. Its cities crumbled and were buried, its script forgotten, its very existence lost to memory, until the archaeologists of the modern age dug it back into the light. Today, the Indus Valley civilization stands as one of the great lost worlds. A civilization that, in some ways, was ahead of its time, and yet remains tantalizingly out of reach. We can walk its clean, ordered streets and admire its plumbing and its art. But until we can read its silent script, its people will keep their deepest secrets. An advanced, peaceful, and orderly civilization that rose along a river, flourished for centuries, and then quietly faded into the dust of time. The Indus Valley. On Christmas Eve, 1945, a family home in West Virginia burned to the ground. The parents and 4 of their children escaped into the cold night. But 5 of the children were never seen again. And when the ashes cooled, searchers found something impossible. No bones, no remains, nothing at all. Had the children died in the fire? Or had they been taken? Their parents spent the rest of their lives searching for an answer. This is the story of the Sodder Children. The story begins with the Sodder family, who lived in the small town of Fayetteville in West Virginia in the 1940s. The father, George Sodder, was an Italian immigrant who had built a successful life in America. He ran a trucking business and was well known in the community. He and his wife, Jenny, had a large family. 10 children in all, ranging from teenagers down to little ones, filling their hillside home with life. They were a hard-working, close-knit family, looking forward to celebrating Christmas together in 1945 as the world emerged from the long years of war. But George Sodder was also an outspoken man with strong opinions. And those opinions may have made him some dangerous enemies. He was openly critical of certain powerful figures back in his homeland of Italy, and he was not shy about sharing his views in the local community. This detail matters because in the months before the fire, the family experienced a series of strange and unsettling incidents. Looking back, these incidents seem like warnings. At the time, they were merely odd. But together, they paint a troubling picture. First, a strange man came to the house, looking for work. He wandered around the back of the property, then pointed to 2 fuse boxes and made a chilling remark. He said that those fuse boxes would cause a fire someday. It was an odd and ominous thing to say, especially since the family's electrical system had recently been checked and declared safe. Around the same time, another man visited, supposedly to sell life insurance. When George refused to buy, the man became angry and made a threat. He warned George that his house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed because of the remarks George had made about Italy. It was a direct and frightening threat. In the weeks that followed, the older sons noticed a strange car parked along the highway with a man inside who seemed to be watching the children as they came home from school. These were the shadows gathering around the Sodder home. And then came Christmas Eve and the night that would change everything. It was December the 24th, 1945. It was a happy evening. The younger children had received small toys, and they begged to stay up late to play. Jenny, the mother, agreed to let some of them stay up, asking the older ones to do a few chores before bed. Then she went to sleep with the youngest child. At around midnight, the telephone rang. Jenny got up to answer it. A strange woman's voice asked for someone she did not know, and there was odd laughter in the background. Confused, Jenny said the caller had the wrong number and hung up. As she went back through the house, she noticed the lights were still on and the doors unlocked. She locked up and went back to bed. But soon after, she was woken again, this time by the sound of something hitting the roof and a rolling noise. She thought little of it and drifted off once more. Then, about an hour later, she woke to the smell of smoke. The house was on fire. The fire had started near George's office at the front of the house and was spreading fast. Jenny roused George and they scrambled to get the children out. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children made it outside into the freezing night. But 5 of the children were upstairs and they did not come down. The 5 missing children were Morris, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty, ranging from about 5 to 14 years old. Their father turned back to save them. And here the night spiraled into a series of cruel failures, each one stranger than the last. George rushed to climb up to the children's window, but the stairs were already in flames. He ran outside to fetch the ladder he always kept by the house, so he could reach the upper windows from outside. But the ladder was gone. It had vanished. Desperate, George tried to start one of his trucks, to drive it close and climb on top to reach the windows. He had 2 trucks that worked perfectly the day before. Neither would start. He tried to scoop water from a rain barrel, but it had frozen solid in the cold. Every avenue of rescue was blocked, one after another, as if by design. A daughter tried to call the fire department, but the telephone line was dead. A neighbor who saw the blaze also tried to call and could not get through either. The family could only watch in horror as the house burned. The fire was so fast and fierce that the entire structure collapsed in less than an hour. The fire department, which had to be reached by a roundabout method, did not arrive until the morning, hours later, long after there was anything left to save. By dawn, the Sodder home was a smoking ruin. The family was devastated, certain that their 5 children had perished in the flames. But then came the detail that changed everything. When the ashes were searched for the remains of the 5 children, searchers found nothing. No bones, no teeth, no identifiable human remains at all. This was deeply strange. A house fire, even a hot one, does not typically destroy a body so completely that nothing whatsoever remains, especially the bones. The fire had burned for less than an hour before the house collapsed. Experts and family members argued that it simply had not burned long enough or hot enough to leave nothing behind. And so a terrible, hopeful thought took root in the parents' minds. What if the children had not died in the fire at all? What if they had been taken before it started? The official ruling was that the fire had been caused by faulty wiring and that the 5 children had died in the blaze. The case was closed, but the Sodders refused to accept it. They pointed to all the strange details. The threats, the missing ladder, the trucks that would not start, the dead phone line, the thing that hit the roof. That object on the roof, they later came to believe, may have been some kind of incendiary device deliberately thrown to start the fire. Taken together, the family became convinced that the fire had been set deliberately as a cover and that their 5 children had been kidnapped. And so began a search that would last for decades. George and Jenny Sodder never gave up hope that their children were alive somewhere. They gathered curious reports. A woman at a motel claimed to have seen some of the children the morning after the fire. Others reported sightings across the region. The family hired private investigators and put up a large billboard along the highway, showing the faces of the 5 missing children and asking for any information. Years later, Jenny received a mysterious letter in the mail. Inside was a photograph of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to one of her missing sons, Louis. On the back were strange, cryptic words, but there was no return address and no way to trace where it had come from. The family was never able to find the man in the photo. It was a tantalizing, heartbreaking clue that led nowhere. George Sodder died still believing his children had been taken. Jenny wore black for the rest of her life and kept searching until her own death. To this day, the fate of the 5 Sodder children has never been established. No remains were ever found. No kidnappers were ever identified. No reunion ever came. Were they lost in the flames in a fire that defied all explanation? Or were they stolen away into the night, never to be seen again? Both answers remain impossibly out of reach. The billboard stood for decades, the children's faces watching over the highway, asking a question that was never answered. The mystery of the Sodder children. Beneath the fields of central China lies an army. Thousands of life-sized warriors, made of clay, standing in silent ranks exactly where they were buried. Each soldier has a different face. They were built to guard a single man for all eternity. The first emperor of China. And at the center of it all lies his tomb. A vast buried mound that, to this day, no one has dared to open. This is the story of the Terracotta Army. Our story begins not with an emperor, but with farmers. In the spring of 1974, in a dry region of central China, a group of local farmers set out to dig a well. The area had been hit by drought and they needed water. So they chose a spot and began to dig down through the earth. As they dug deeper, their tools struck something hard. They began to pull up pieces of fired clay and then something that stopped them cold. A clay human head. The farmers were unsettled. They had no idea they had just punched through the roof of one of the greatest archaeological treasures in human history. Archaeologists were called in, and as they began to excavate, the scale of what lay beneath the field slowly, astonishingly, revealed itself. It was not a single statue or a handful. It was an army, rank upon rank of life-sized clay soldiers, buried in great pits, standing in military formation. To understand why this vast clay army existed, we have to meet the man it was made to serve. One of the most powerful and ruthless figures in all of history. His name was Qin Shi Huang. He was the first emperor of a unified China, and his ambition shaped a civilization that endures to this day. Before him, China was not one country, but a collection of warring states, locked in centuries of brutal conflict. Through war and conquest, the king of the state of Qin defeated his rivals one by one, and around 221 years before the Common Era, he unified them all under his rule. He declared himself the first emperor and set about transforming his new empire with staggering force and vision. He standardized the riding, the money, and even the width of cart axles. He built roads and canals and connected early walls into the beginnings of what would become the Great Wall of China. But the first emperor was also a tyrant. His reforms came at a terrible human cost, with vast numbers of laborers worked to death on his great projects. And he was consumed by one great obsession, a terror of death and a desperate desire to live forever. He sent expeditions to find a mythical elixir of immortality. He took potions that may have contained mercury in the belief they would extend his life. And he prepared on a colossal scale for the afterlife. Because if he could not be immortal in this world, he would rule in the next. And so he commanded the building of an enormous tomb complex, guarded by an entire army. The Terracotta Army was that guard. A force of clay soldiers built to protect the emperor in the afterlife, just as a real army had protected him in life. And the numbers are breathtaking. Archaeologists estimate there are around 8,000 soldiers in total, buried across several great pits. But it is not just infantry. There are also some 670 clay horses and over 130 war chariots, a complete imperial army in clay. The soldiers are arranged for battle in proper military formation. There are armored infantry, archers, cavalry, charioteers, and officers, each in their correct place. The main pit alone holds thousands of warriors, lined up in long corridors, facing east, ready to defend their emperor against any threat from beyond. Originally, the warriors were not the muted gray we see today. They were painted in vivid colors, with bright reds, greens, blues, and purples, an army that once blazed with life. Tragically, much of that paint flaked away within moments of being exposed to the dry air after 2,000 years underground, a challenge that still shapes how the site is excavated. The soldiers carried real bronze weapons. Swords, spears, and crossbows, many still sharp after 20 centuries, some treated with a coating that preserved them remarkably. But the most astonishing thing about the Terracotta Army is the detail, because every single soldier is unique. No two faces are exactly alike. Each warrior has his own features, his own expression. Different eyes, noses, mouths, and hairstyles, as if modeled on real, individual men. Their hair and beards are carefully styled. Their armor is rendered in fine detail, down to the individual studs and the knots in the cords binding the plates. Even the soles of their shoes are textured. The level of craftsmanship, repeated across thousands of figures, is almost beyond belief. The figures were made using an early form of mass production. Bodies, arms, heads, and hands were made separately in molds, then assembled and individually customized. Skilled artisans then added the unique faces and fine details by hand, before the figures were fired in great kilns and painted. It was an industrial effort of incredible sophistication. Building the entire complex is thought to have taken hundreds of thousands of workers, laboring for decades. A staggering investment, all for one man's journey into eternity. And yet, as incredible as the Terracotta Army is, it is only the outer guard. It is not the tomb itself. The emperor lies elsewhere, in a place no one has entered. About a mile from the army stands a great mound, covered in earth and trees. It looks almost like a natural hill, but beneath it lies the actual tomb of the first emperor. This burial mound has never been excavated. The emperor's tomb chamber, sealed over 2,000 years ago, remains closed, its secrets locked inside. But we have a tantalizing description of what may lie within, written by a Chinese historian about a century after the emperor's death. According to this account, the tomb is a vast underground palace. Its ceiling is set with pearls and gems to represent the stars and the heavens above. And below, on the floor, a map of the empire was laid out, with its great rivers and seas recreated in flowing liquid mercury, made to move mechanically forever. For a long time, this sounded like legend. But then scientists tested the soil of the Great Mound and made a startling discovery. The earth above the tomb contains unusually high levels of mercury, far above what occurs naturally. The ancient account of mercury rivers may be literally true. The historian also wrote that the tomb was protected by deadly traps, including crossbows rigged to fire automatically at any intruder who dared to break in. So why, after all these years, has the tomb never been opened? The answer is a mix of danger, respect, and the limits of our technology. First, there is the mercury. The chamber may be filled with toxic vapors, making it deadly to enter without extraordinary precautions. Second, and most importantly, there is preservation. Archaeologists remember how the painted warriors faded the moment they met the air. They fear that opening the tomb now would destroy its treasures forever. The decision, wisely, has been to wait. To leave the tomb sealed until science advances enough to open it without harming whatever lies inside. Some treasures are best left to the future. And so the first emperor lies undisturbed, exactly as he was laid to rest over 2,000 years ago in his palace of stars and mercury beneath the quiet hill. Outside, his clay army stands eternal guard, just as he commanded. Thousands of unique faces, frozen in silent vigilance, defending an emperor in death as in life. The Terracotta Army is a window into the mind of a man who would not accept death and who poured the wealth of an empire into the hope of ruling forever. An army of clay, a sealed palace of mercury and stars, and an emperor still waiting in the dark for an eternity that, in a strange way, he has actually achieved. The Terracotta Army. Over 2,000 years ago, someone built a machine of astonishing complexity. a device of dozens of precision gears, capable of predicting the movements of the sun, the moon, and the planets. Nothing else like it would appear for more than 1,000 years. By all rights, it should not exist. And yet, it was pulled from the bottom of the sea. It has been called the world's first computer, built in an age of sailing ships and oil lamps. This is the story of the Antikythera Mechanism. Our story begins in the year 1900, with a group of Greek sponge divers sailing home across the Mediterranean Sea. A storm forced them to take shelter near a small, rocky island called Antikythera, lying between the larger islands of Crete and the Greek mainland. While they waited for the weather to clear, the divers decided to do some diving in the area, hoping to find sponges in the waters off the island. One diver descended into the deep, and what he saw on the seabed terrified him. He surfaced in a panic, babbling about a pile of dead bodies on the ocean floor. But they were not bodies. When the others investigated, they realized the diver had stumbled upon the wreck of an ancient ship, scattered with bronze and marble statues. The arms and faces of the statues, half buried in the sand, had looked like human remains in the gloom. The divers had found a treasure trove from the ancient world. The wreck was that of a large cargo ship, which had sunk around 2,000 years ago, carrying a fortune in art and goods, likely bound for Rome. The Greek government organized one of the first major underwater archaeological recoveries in history. Over months, divers brought up statues, coins, jewelry, and pottery. The recovered treasures were taken to a museum in Athens, where scholars set to work cataloging them. And among the haul was something that, at first, no one paid much attention to. It was an unremarkable-looking lump. A corroded mass of bronze and rotted wood, encrusted by 2,000 years under the sea. It seemed like little more than debris. For months, it sat ignored among the more glamorous statues and treasures. Then the lump began to dry out and crack apart. And as it split, something extraordinary was revealed. Inside the corroded mass, peeking out from the bronze, was the unmistakable shape of a gear wheel. A precise, toothed cog of a kind that should not have existed in the ancient world. A scholar examining it could hardly believe his eyes. Finely cut gears were the stuff of clockwork, of machinery, of an age of precision engineering that lay many centuries in the future. Yet here was such a gear, embedded in an object that had sunk 2,000 years ago. It was as if someone had found a modern wristwatch in an ancient tomb. This was the first hint of what the world would come to call the Antikythera Mechanism. An understanding it would take a century of painstaking work. The trouble was that the mechanism was in pieces. It had broken into several fragments, corroded and fragile, with much of it lost or fused together by time. For decades, scholars studied the fragments, but the technology of the time was not advanced enough to see inside them, where the most important details were hidden. They could see gears on the surface and faint inscriptions in ancient Greek. But the inner workings, the heart of the machine, remained locked inside the corroded bronze. The breakthroughs came as technology improved. In the modern era, researchers turned powerful tools on the fragments. X-rays and then advanced three-dimensional scanning. Using high-resolution imaging, scientists could finally peer inside the fragments without damaging them and map the gears hidden within, layer by layer. What they found was staggering. The mechanism contained at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, and possibly many more, all working together in a single, intricate system. The gears were cut with remarkable precision, their teeth carefully shaped, their sizes calculated to produce exact ratios. This was the work of a true master craftsman. The whole device had been housed in a wooden case, about the size of a large book, with dials on the front and back, and a small hand crank on the side. By turning that crank, the user set all the gears in motion at once, and the dials would display their results. But what exactly did it calculate? The answer was the cosmos itself. The Antikythera Mechanism was an astronomical calculator, a model of the heavens as the ancient Greeks understood them. Turning the crank moved the device forward or backward in time. And as it did, the dials showed the positions of the sun and the moon against the background of the stars. It could display the phases of the moon, showing whether it would be full or new on any given date, using a clever little rotating ball, half black and half silver. It tracked the cycles of the calendar, marking the months and the years. It is believed to have shown the positions of the known planets as they wandered across the sky. Most impressively of all, it could predict eclipses. The dials indicated when eclipses of the sun and moon were likely to occur, sometimes years in advance. And it even tracked the cycle of the ancient Greek games, including the Olympics, marking which festival would be held in which year. It was a calendar of civilization itself. All of this from a hand-cranked box of bronze gears made 2,000 years ago. It compressed the rhythms of the heavens into a device you could hold in your lap. To appreciate just how astonishing this is, consider that geared mechanisms of comparable complexity would not appear again in Europe until the great astronomical clocks of the medieval period. More than 1,000 years separate the Antikythera mechanism from anything else like it. So who built this impossible object? The truth is, we do not know for certain. No name is attached to it, but scholars have been able to make some educated guesses about its origins. The inscriptions and the style of the work suggest it was made somewhere in the Greek world, around the 2nd or 1st century before the Common Era. Some have linked it to the great thinkers of the age, including the famous mathematician and inventor Archimedes, who was said to have built devices modeling the heavens. Others point to the island of Rhodes, a renowned center of astronomy at the time, as a possible birthplace for the device. But these remain theories, not certainties. What is clear is that the mechanism could not have been the only one of its kind. A device this sophisticated must have been the product of a long tradition of skill and knowledge. There must have been earlier, simpler versions and the expertise to refine them over generations. The Antikythera mechanism was a pinnacle, not a lucky accident. And this raises a haunting question. If the ancient world possessed knowledge and skill like this, what happened to it? Why did such technology vanish for over 1,000 years? The likely answer is loss. As empires rose and fell, as libraries burned and knowledge was scattered, much of the ancient world's learning simply disappeared. The skills to build such a device may have been held by only a handful of masters, their knowledge passed down by hand, never widely recorded. When they died, it could die with them. The Antikythera mechanism, then, is more than a marvel. It is a reminder of how fragile knowledge can be, and how much brilliance the past may have held that we have simply lost. Today, the fragments of the mechanism are kept in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, displayed alongside detailed reconstructions of how it once worked. Researchers continue to study it, building working models, decoding its inscriptions, and uncovering new details about this extraordinary ancient machine. It stands as the oldest known device of its kind. A genuine analog computer, conceived and built by human hands more than 2,000 years ago. It tells us that our ancestors were not the simple, primitive people we sometimes imagine. They gazed at the heavens, understood their rhythms, and captured them in turning bronze. A masterpiece of genius, lost beneath the waves for 2,000 years, and recovered to remind us of just how clever the ancient world truly was. The Antikythera Mechanism. In the early morning hours, a gang broke into a warehouse near London, expecting to find a few £1 million in cash. Instead, they found 3 tons of pure gold. In a matter of minutes, they pulled off the biggest robbery in British history. But the gold would prove to be more dangerous than they could ever imagine. Almost everyone who touched it would face ruin, betrayal, or death. They called it the crime of the century. This is the story of the Brink's-Mat robbery. It was the 26th of November, 1983. Near London's Heathrow Airport stood a high-security warehouse belonging to a company called Brink's-Mat. The company specialized in storing and transporting valuables. Cash, jewelry, and precious metals passed through its doors on their way to and from the airport. The building was protected by alarms, heavy doors, and security guards. It was meant to be one of the safest places in Britain to keep something of great value. On that particular night, the vault held an extraordinary cargo. Crates of gold bullion waiting to be flown abroad. In total, almost 3.5 tons of gold. Its value in 1983 was around £26 million. Today, that same gold would be worth hundreds of millions. It was a fortune almost beyond imagining. But the gold was not supposed to be the target. The gang that struck Brink's-Mat that night did not even know it was there. They had come for something else entirely. They had come for cash. Their information told them the warehouse held a few £1 million in currency, an enormous prize on its own. The gold would be a staggering, accidental bonus. The robbery was an inside job. One of the security guards at the warehouse was a man named Anthony Black. And Anthony Black had a dangerous connection. His sister was married to a man named Brian Robinson, a seasoned and respected figure in the London criminal underworld. Robinson saw an opportunity and he took it. Through Black, the gang gained the most valuable thing any robber can have: knowledge from the inside. The layout, the alarms, the schedules, and the keys. Black provided a key to the main door and detailed information about how the security worked. With that, the gang could walk straight into one of Britain's most secure buildings. The man who led the actual raid was Mickey McAvoy, a hardened and feared armed robber. He assembled a small professional crew for the job. The plan was simple and brutal. Get inside before dawn, overpower the guards, force them to open the vault, and take the cash. They expected to be in and out quickly. In the early hours of that November morning, the gang moved. Using the inside knowledge, they slipped into the warehouse and seized control before anyone could react. The guards on duty were caught completely by surprise. The robbers were masked and ruthless, and they meant to get what they had come for, no matter what. To force the guards to cooperate, the gang used terrifying methods. They poured petrol over one of the men and threatened to set him alight if the codes were not given. Faced with such terror, the guards gave up the combinations to the vault. The robbers opened the heavy doors, expecting to find their stacks of cash. But what they saw stopped them in their tracks. Box after box, crate after crate of solid gold bullion. Far more than any cash they had ever dreamed of stealing. For a moment, the gang could hardly believe it. They had stumbled into a fortune in gold. But 3.5 tons is an enormous weight, and they had to move fast. They loaded the gold into a waiting van, box by heavy box, working against the clock. The metal was so heavy that the van's suspension sagged under the load. And then they were gone, vanishing into the dawn with a treasure that would haunt Britain for decades. The whole raid had taken only a couple of hours. When the police arrived, they were stunned by the scale of it. £26 million in gold gone. It was the largest robbery the country had ever seen. But now the gang faced a problem far harder than the robbery itself. They had 3 tons of stolen gold. And gold, unlike cash, cannot simply be spent. Every bar of bullion was marked and traceable. To turn the gold into usable money, the gang would have to melt it down, disguise its origin, and quietly sell it back into the market. For that, they needed help. They turned to a man who would become central to the whole saga. A wealthy and well-connected criminal named Kenneth Noy. Noy had the contacts to launder the gold. He arranged for it to be melted down, mixed with other metals, and sold through legitimate-looking channels with the help of a network of associates. The scheme was vast. Millions of pounds began flowing through bank accounts and front companies. The dirty gold was slowly being turned into clean, untraceable wealth. So much cash was moving that it reportedly caused a noticeable spike in deposits at certain banks. The sheer volume of money was almost impossible to hide. Investigators later said that the Brinksmat gold transformed the British underworld. The fortune it generated was reinvested into drugs, property, and other crimes, spreading like a stain. It became known as the robbery that paid for itself again and again. The money multiplied, funding new criminal empires across London and beyond. But all that money also drew attention. The police knew the gold had to be going somewhere. And slowly, painstakingly, they began to follow the trail. The first breakthrough came quickly, through the inside man. Investigators realized that the gang had detailed knowledge of the warehouse, and suspicion fell on the guard, Anthony Black. Black cracked under questioning. He confessed his role and named the men behind the raid. His testimony led to the arrest of the ringleaders, including Mickey McAvoy and Brian Robinson. McAvoy and Robinson were convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Justice, it seemed, had been done. But the gold itself was still missing. And the men who had organized the laundering were still free, quietly turning the bullion into cash. The police now turned their full attention to following the money. Officers began watching Kenneth Noy and his associates. They set up surveillance, following the suspects and observing the strange movements around Noy's property. Then, in January of 1985, the investigation took a deadly turn. An undercover police officer named John Fordham was watching Noy's grounds at night, hidden in the darkness. Noy discovered him. In the violent confrontation that followed, the officer was stabbed and killed. It was a shocking escalation that sent the case to a new level of seriousness. Noy was tried for the killing, but he claimed self-defense, saying he believed he was being attacked by an intruder. Astonishingly, he was acquitted of murder. However, he could not escape the gold. Noy was later convicted of handling the stolen Brinksmat bullion and sentenced to many years in prison. But the curse of the gold was only just beginning. Over the years, an eerie pattern emerged. A startling number of people connected to the Brinksmat gold met violent or untimely ends. Some were murdered in gangland killings. Others died in suspicious circumstances. The gold seemed to leave a trail of bodies wherever it went, and people spoke of it as cursed. Kenneth Noy himself would later kill again, years after his release, in a notorious road rage incident that ended in a young man's death. He was eventually convicted of that murder. The violence rippled outward for decades, touching launderers, middlemen, and associates. The robbery had unleashed something that no one could control. And through it all, one question lingered. Where had all the gold gone? Despite the arrests and the convictions, the vast majority of the bullion was never recovered. It is believed that much of the Brinksmat gold was melted down, disguised, and sold so thoroughly that it entered the legitimate market without a trace. Some say that anyone in Britain who bought gold jewelry in the years after 1983 may, without knowing it, be wearing a tiny piece of the Brinksmat haul. The gold simply melted into the world. It began as a robbery for cash and became a fortune in gold that corrupted everything it touched. Most of it was never found. The Brinksmack gold remains out there still, hidden in plain sight.